Welcome to Tales, in the mighty Ashanti kingdom, where gold flowed like rivers and secrets festered like untreated wounds. A king's daughter would risk everything, her crown, her life, and her soul, for a love that could destroy two kingdoms and change the course of history forever. Princess Akosua Mansa was born under the blessing of the Golden Stool, destined to rule the most powerful kingdom in West Africa. At 22, she possessed beauty that made grown warriors weep and wisdom that humbled the eldest council members. Her skin gleamed like polished amber, adorned with intricate gold jewelry that told the story of 7 generations of Ashanti royalty. The ceremonial kente cloth that draped her shoulders was woven with threads of pure gold, each pattern representing a victory her ancestors had won in battle. Yet beneath all this magnificence lived a restless heart that yearned for something more than the gilded cage of royalty. The palace of Kumasi rose like a golden mountain from the earth, its walls embedded with precious metals that caught the sun's rays and threw them back in dazzling displays of wealth and power. Here, surrounded by hundreds of servants, guards, and courtiers, Princess Akosua lived a life that millions would envy, but which felt to her like a beautiful prison. Every day was mapped out in rigid ceremony. Morning prayers to the ancestors, afternoon councils where she was expected to sit silently while men made decisions about her future, evening feasts where potential suitors from neighboring kingdoms paraded their wealth before her, like peacocks displaying their plumage. She had been promised in marriage to King Nana Osei of the Denkira kingdom since birth, a political alliance that would unite two great powers but which filled her heart with dread. On this particular morning, as the Harmattan winds carried the scent of distant rain across the palace grounds, Princess Akosua stood on her balcony overlooking the royal gardens. Below, she could see the slaves tending to the plants that fed and beautified the royal household. It was here that her eyes first fell upon a young man whose very presence seemed to change the quality of light around him. He moved with a grace that spoke of noble birth despite his simple slave's wrapper, and when he looked up, their eyes met across the impossible gulf of class and circumstance. In that moment, Princess Akosua felt her carefully ordered world begin to crack like clay in drought, for she had just fallen in love with the one person in the kingdom she could never have. His name was Kwame Ashanti, and though he wore the rough cloth of a slave, royal blood flowed through his veins as surely as the Volta River flowed to the sea. He was the exiled prince of the Ga kingdom, captured during a border war when he was barely 18, and sold into slavery to prevent him from reclaiming his throne. Now 25, he had spent 7 years in the palace. His true identity, known only to the eldest griot who had recognized the distinctive tribal scarification on his chest. Marks that told the story of his royal lineage in patterns older than memory itself. Kwame had learned to hide his noble bearing beneath a mask of servility, to lower his eyes when royalty passed, to speak only when spoken to. But no amount of forced submission could dim the intelligence that blazed in his dark eyes, or suppress the natural authority that made even the other slaves look to him for leadership. He worked in the palace gardens because the sight of growing things reminded him of freedom, and because in the early morning hours before the palace woke, he could almost pretend he was still the prince who once rode across his own lands with the wind in his hair, and the future stretching endlessly before him. The morning Princess Akosua first noticed him. Kwame had been tending to the sacred baobab tree that grew at the center of the royal garden, a tree said to hold the spirits of all the Ashanti kings who had come before. He was singing softly in his native Ga language, a song his mother had taught him about a bird that flew so high it could see all the kingdoms of the earth. When he looked up and saw the princess watching him, he felt his heart stop and restart with a different rhythm. Even from across the garden, he could see something in her eyes that went beyond the casual interest of royalty observing a slave. There was recognition there, as if she could see past his humble clothes to the prince he had once been, and in that recognition lay both the greatest hope and the greatest danger he had ever known. What began as stolen glances across the royal garden grew into something far more dangerous, a connection that defied every law of the kingdom and threatened the very foundations of the social order. Princess Akosua found herself inventing excuses to visit the gardens, claiming she needed fresh air for her health or wished to study the medicinal properties of the plants. Each time, she would position herself where she could watch Kwame work, marveling at the way his hands coaxed life from the earth with the same gentle authority her father used to command armies. Kwame, for his part, began to arrange his work schedule so that he would be in the garden during the princess's visits. He would sing the old songs of his people, knowing she was listening, and sometimes he would catch her humming the melodies later as she walked through the palace halls. They never spoke directly, but they communicated through a language older than words, the tilt of a head, the lingering of a gaze, the way she would accidentally drop a flower near where he was working, and how he would carefully tend to it as if it were more precious than gold. The danger of their silent courtship was not lost on either of them. The penalty for a slave who dared to look upon a royal woman with desire was death, and the shame that would fall upon a princess who encouraged such attention would destroy not only her own future, but potentially spark a war between kingdoms. Yet neither could resist the pull they felt toward each other, a force as natural and inevitable as the tide. They began to leave small gifts for each other. She would drop a gold bangle near his work area, and he would carve tiny wooden animals that appeared on her windowsill as if by magic. These tokens became their secret language, each one a declaration of love that grew bolder and more desperate with each passing day. It was Princess Akosua's closest friend and confidant, Amma, who first noticed the change in her behavior. Amma was the daughter of the palace's head griot, wise beyond her years and possessed of the kind of intuitive understanding that comes from growing up surrounded by the stories and secrets of the royal court. "Sister," she said one evening as they sat braiding each other's hair, "your heart sings a song that your mind knows is forbidden. Be careful, for there are those in the palace who would use such knowledge to destroy us all." The annual festival of the Golden Stool was the most important celebration in the Ashanti calendar, a week-long extravaganza that drew visitors from across West Africa to witness the glory of the kingdom and pay homage to its power. For Princess Akosua, it was typically a time of beauty and pride, as she wore her finest kente cloth and gold jewelry to preside over the ceremonies alongside her father, King Osei Tutu III. This year, however, the festival felt like a countdown to her doom, for her father had announced that he would use the celebrations to formally present her to King Nana Osi of Denkira and finalize the details of their marriage. As the festival began, the palace grounds transformed into a wonderland of color and sound. Drummers beat out rhythms that seemed to make the very earth pulse with life. Dancers spun in circles of scarlet and gold that caught the firelight like living flames. And griots recounted the heroic deeds of Ashanti ancestors in voices that could be heard above the celebrations. Merchants from across the continent displayed their finest wares: ivory from the forest kingdoms, salt from the northern deserts, exotic spices that perfumed the air with the scent of distant lands. For the slaves who served at the festival, it was the one time of year when they were allowed to participate in the celebration, singing traditional work songs and performing dances that told the stories of their own peoples. It was during the festival's third night, as Princess Akosua sat on the royal dais watching the celebrations, that she heard a voice that made her soul tremble. Kwame was part of a group of slaves performing a traditional Ga war dance, his movements so powerful and graceful that even the Ashanti nobles stopped their conversations to watch. When he began to sing, a song about a prince who lost his kingdom but never lost his dignity, his voice carried such pain and nobility that Princess Akosua felt tears spring to her eyes. In that moment, she understood not just that she loved him, but that he was far more than the slave the world believed him to be. King Nana Ose of Denkira, a man in his 40s with the cold eyes of someone who viewed everything in terms of political advantage, leaned over to King Osei Tutu and said, "That slave sings well. Perhaps I should take him back to Denkira as part of our marriage agreement, entertainment for my new queen." The casual cruelty of the suggestion, the way he spoke of Kwame as if he were a particularly interesting piece of property, ignited something fierce and protective in Princess Akosua's heart. She knew in that moment that she would rather die than let this man possess either her or the one she loved. Unable to bear the weight of her unspoken love any longer, Princess Akosua made a decision that would change the course of both their lives forever. On the fourth night of the festival, as the palace settled into the deep sleep that follows great celebration, she slipped from her chambers and made her way through the darkened corridors to the royal garden. The moon was full, casting everything in silver light that made the familiar grounds seem magical and otherworldly. At the heart of the garden, beside the sacred baobab tree, she waited with her heart hammering against her ribs like a caged bird desperate for freedom. Kwame, who had been unable to sleep for thinking of the princess's tears during his performance, had also been drawn to the garden by forces he couldn't name. When he saw her standing beneath the ancient tree, clothed in a simple white wrapper that made her look more like a goddess than a mortal woman, he fell to his knees in reverence and terror. "My princess," he whispered, his voice rough with emotion, "you should not be here. If we are discovered, then we will face whatever comes together," she replied, her voice steady despite the enormity of what she was risking. She moved closer to him, and in the moonlight, he could see that she wore no gold jewelry, no royal insignia. She had stripped away everything that marked her as different from him, except for the natural nobility that radiated from her like light. "I know who you are, Kwame Ashanti of the Ga people. I have heard the stories the old griots whisper when they think no one is listening. You are a prince, just as I am a princess. And in this moment, under the eyes of the ancestors, we stand as equals." The revelation that she knew his true identity was like a physical blow to Kwame's chest. For 7 years, he had hidden his royal heritage, had forced himself to forget the weight of a crown on his brow and the feeling of commanding armies. To have her speak his name, his real name, with such reverence and understanding, broke something open inside him that he had thought was sealed forever. "My heart belongs to you," he said, rising to his feet so that they stood face to face beneath the baobab tree. "It has from the moment I first saw you, and it will until the day the ancestors call me home. But Akosua, beloved princess, what future can there be for us? I am a slave with nothing to offer but a love that could destroy us both." Princess Akosua reached out and took Kwame's hands in hers, feeling the calluses that spoke of years of hard labor, the scars that told stories of battles fought in chains. "Love is the only thing that matters," she said, her voice fierce with conviction. "My father can command my presence at ceremonies, can arrange my marriage to whomever serves his political needs, but he cannot command my heart. That belongs to me, and I give it freely to you." Under the ancient baobab tree, surrounded by the spirits of kings and queens who had ruled for centuries before them, they made vows that would have been recognized by no court, but were blessed by older powers than any earthly authority. They spoke words of love in both Twi and Ga, mixing their languages as they planned to mix their lives, promising fidelity that would transcend death itself. Kwame carved their initials into the bark of the sacred tree, knowing that this act of defiance could cost him his life, but unable to resist marking their love in something permanent and enduring. "We must be careful," Princess Akosua whispered as they held each other in the silver moonlight. "My marriage to King Nana Ose is to be announced in 3 days' time, and once that happens, I will be watched constantly until the wedding ceremony. But I have a plan, a way for us to be together without bringing disaster upon both our peoples." She told him of her idea to convince her father to send her on a diplomatic mission to the Northern Territories, a journey that would take months and during which she could find ways to be alone with Kwame. It was dangerous and complicated, but it was the only hope they had of building a life together without igniting a war that would consume thousands of innocent lives. As dawn approached and they prepared to return to their separate worlds, they sealed their secret engagement with a kiss that felt like a prayer and a promise combined. Neither of them saw the figure watching from the shadows of the palace walls, Okofo, the king's most trusted advisor, whose loyalty to the crown was matched only by his ambition to rise even higher in the royal hierarchy. What he had witnessed would either destroy the princess he secretly coveted for himself or provide him with the leverage he needed to bend the royal family to his will. Okofo had served in the royal court for over 20 years, rising from a minor clerk to become King Osei Tutu's most trusted advisor through a combination of genuine ability and ruthless political maneuvering. He was a man who understood that information was the most valuable currency in any kingdom, and he had built an extensive network of spies and informants throughout the palace and beyond. His feelings for Princess Akosua had developed over the years from respectful admiration to obsessive desire, though he had never dared to voice them given the vast difference in their stations. Now, armed with the knowledge of her forbidden love affair, he saw an opportunity to either destroy her or possess her completely. Rather than immediately reporting what he had seen to the king, Okofo chose a more subtle approach. Over the following days, he began to plant seeds of suspicion in strategic conversations, mentioning how distracted the princess seemed, how often she was seen in the gardens, how the slaves appeared to be singing more boldly than usual. He spoke to the head of the royal guard about the importance of maintaining proper discipline among the servants during the festival, and to the queen mother about the need to keep close watch on the princess as her wedding day approached. His masterstroke came when he arranged a private audience with King Osei Tutu under the pretense of discussing security arrangements for the remaining festival events. "My king," he said with perfectly calculated concern, "I hesitate to bring this matter to your attention, but I fear there may be improprieties occurring within the palace that could threaten the stability of your daughter's engagement to King Nana Osei." He did not directly accuse the princess of any wrongdoing, but instead spoke in careful implications and worried suggestions that allowed the king's own fears and suspicions to fill in the details. King Osei Tutu was not a fool, and he had noticed his daughter's recent distraction and restlessness. The suggestion that there might be something improper about her behavior awakened all his protective instincts as a father and his strategic concerns as a ruler. "What exactly are you suggesting, Okofo?" he asked, his voice carrying the dangerous quiet that preceded royal thunderstorms. The advisor's response would set in motion a chain of events that would test every relationship in the palace and determine whether love could triumph over the crushing weight of political necessity. The morning after his conversation with Okofo, King Osei Tutu found himself observing his daughter with new eyes during the daily court proceedings. Princess Akosua, who had always been attentive to the business of statecraft, seemed distant and preoccupied, her gaze often drifting to the windows that overlooked the royal garden. When he called upon her to offer her opinion on a trade dispute with the Fonte people, she started as if awakening from a dream and gave a response that, while intelligent, lacked her usual passionate engagement with the affairs of the kingdom. That afternoon, the king decided to take an unscheduled walk through the palace grounds, accompanied only by his most trusted bodyguard. He told himself he was simply inspecting the preparations for the final night of the festival, but his path inevitably led him to the royal garden, where he had been told his daughter spent so much of her time. What he saw there confirmed his worst suspicions and ignited a rage that threatened to consume his legendary composure. Princess Akosua stood near the sacred baobab tree, and though she appeared to be alone, her posture and expression suggested she was waiting for someone. More damning still, he could see fresh carvings in the bark of the ancient tree, markings that looked suspiciously like initials intertwined in the traditional pattern of a love pledge. When Princess Akosua sensed her father's presence and turned to face him, the guilt written across her face was as clear as if she had confessed her crimes aloud. "Father?" she said, her voice carefully controlled but unable to hide the tremor of fear that ran beneath her words. "I was just enjoying the evening air before tonight's celebrations." King Osei Tutu approached the baobab tree and examined the carved initials, his face a mask of cold fury that made the very air seem to crackle with dangerous energy. "These markings," he said, his voice deadly quiet, "are fresh, made within the last few days. And unless my eyes deceive me, that is your initial intertwined with another." He turned to face his daughter, and she saw in his eyes the same implacable determination that had built the Ashanti Empire and crushed all who dared oppose it. "You will tell me immediately who has dared to defile this sacred tree with presumptions of intimacy with my daughter," or I will have every male in this palace questioned under circumstances that will leave few of them capable of ever committing such presumption again." Princess Akosua stood frozen beneath her father's wrathful gaze, knowing that her next words would determine not only her own fate, but the life of the man she loved more than her own existence. The rational part of her mind screamed at her to lie, to invent some story that might deflect her father's suspicions, to sacrifice her happiness to preserve Kwame's life. But as she looked into King Ose Tutu's eyes and saw the depth of his betrayal and rage, she realized that half-truths and deceptions would no longer serve. Her father was too intelligent and too angry to be fooled, and any attempt at subterfuge would only make the eventual revelation more catastrophic. "Father," she said, straightening her shoulders and lifting her chin with the same regal bearing that had been bred into her bones, "I will not dishonor you or myself with lies. Yes, I have given my heart to someone whose station makes our love seem impossible. But before you pass judgment, I ask you to remember that you taught me to value honor, courage, and integrity above all else. Would you have me be false to those teachings now, when they matter most?" The king's face darkened further at what he saw as his daughter's defiant response to his reasonable demand for information. "You dare to lecture me about honor while you conduct clandestine affairs that threaten the very foundation of our kingdom's alliances? Your marriage to King Nana Ose is not merely a personal matter, Akosua. It is a treaty written in the language of kinship, a bond that will secure peace and prosperity for thousands of our people. Your love could spark a war that would drench this land in blood. And would you have me sacrifice my soul for political convenience?" Princess Akosua replied, her own anger beginning to match her father's in intensity. "You speak of honor, but what honor is there in forcing me into the bed of a man who looks at me like I am a piece of gold to be counted and stored in his treasury? King Nana Ose does not see me as a woman with thoughts and feelings and dreams. He sees me as a symbol of his conquest over the Ashanti people. Is this the legacy you want for your only daughter?" The confrontation that followed would be remembered by both of them for the rest of their lives, a battle of wills between two people who loved each other deeply but found themselves on opposite sides of an impossible divide. King Ose Tutu demanded to know the identity of his daughter's lover, threatening increasingly severe consequences for every moment she delayed. Princess Akosua refused to speak the name, knowing that to do so would sign Kwame's death warrant and destroy any hope they might have of finding a solution that could preserve both their love and the kingdom's stability. The standoff between father and daughter might have continued indefinitely, but fate intervened in the form of Kwame himself, who had been watching the confrontation from his hiding place among the garden shrubs and could no longer bear to see Princess Akosua suffer for his sake. With the courage that had made him a prince worthy of his people's loyalty, he stepped from the shadows and walked toward the sacred baobab tree where the two most powerful people in the kingdom faced each other in deadlock. "Your Majesty," he said, falling to one knee before King Ose Tutu, but keeping his head raised so that his eyes met the king's without flinching. "I am the one who has presumed to love your daughter. The fault is mine alone, and I accept whatever punishment you deem fit." The sight of a slave, for that was all Kwame appeared to be, speaking with such dignity and accepting responsibility for what the king saw as an unforgivable crime, caught King Ose Tutu off guard. There was something about the young man's bearing, his way of speaking, that seemed incongruous with his humble station. Princess Akosua watched in terror and admiration as the man she loved willingly placed his life in her father's hands rather than allow her to bear the consequences of their love alone. "Father," she said, her voice breaking with emotion, "before you pass judgment, you should know that Kwame is not merely a slave. He is Prince Kwame Asante of the Ga people, stolen from his throne by the fortunes of war but noble-born and royal bred. His love for me is not the presumption of a servant forgetting his place, but the honorable affection of one royal heir for another." The revelation hit King Ose Tutu like a physical blow. He had known of Prince Kwame Asante, had even respected the young ruler's reputation for wisdom and courage before his kingdom fell to Ashanti expansion. To discover that this legendary figure had been living as a slave in his own palace, that his daughter had fallen in love with a man who was technically his equal in birth, if not in current circumstances, changed the entire nature of the situation they faced. Kwame, seeing the recognition dawn in the king's eyes, rose to his feet and spoke with the authority of his birthright. "Your Majesty, I do not ask for your daughter's hand lightly, knowing the complications it would create, but I offer you something that no political marriage could provide: the willing loyalty of the Ga people, who have never forgotten their prince and who would follow me anywhere. Unite our kingdoms through love rather than conquest, and you will gain not just an ally, but a son who will serve your interests as faithfully as he serves his own people." Osei Tutu found himself facing a dilemma unlike any he had encountered in decades of rule. The revelation of Kwame's true identity had transformed what seemed like a clear-cut case of inappropriate behavior into a complex diplomatic situation with far-reaching implications. On one hand, his daughter's marriage to King Nana Ose would cement a valuable alliance with the Denkira kingdom and fulfill obligations that had been years in the making. On the other hand, the possibility of reclaiming Prince Kwame's loyalty and using it to secure the troublesome Ga territories was strategically tempting. After a long silence during which he studied both young people with the calculating gaze of a master strategist, the king spoke. "Prince Kwame Asante, your offer intrigues me, but words are easily spoken in desperate circumstances. How can I be certain that your professed love for my daughter is genuine, and not merely a ploy to escape slavery and reclaim your throne? And how can I be sure that the Ga people, who have had no contact with you for 7 years, would indeed follow your leadership?" What followed was a series of tests that would challenge both Kwame's abilities and the strength of his love for Princess Akosua. The king demanded that Kwame prove his worth by accomplishing 3 seemingly impossible tasks within the span of 7 days. First, he must demonstrate his continued connection to his people by gathering intelligence about Ga movements and loyalties without leaving the palace grounds. Second, he must prove his strategic thinking by devising a plan to resolve a long-standing border dispute that had been troubling the kingdom. Finally, and most crucially, he must show that his love for Princess Akosua was strong enough to survive the ultimate test. He must be willing to give her up, if doing so would truly serve her best interests and the good of both their peoples. Princess Akosua watched in anguish as the man she loved was subjected to trials that seemed designed more to break his spirit than to prove his worth. Yet she also recognized her father's wisdom in demanding proof of commitment that went beyond passionate declarations. The week that followed would test not only Kwame's abilities, but the very foundation of their relationship, for it forced them both to confront the question of whether their love was strong enough to bear the weight of kingdoms and the expectations of history. Kwame approached his first task with the methodical intelligence that had once made him an effective ruler of his own people. Though confined to the palace grounds, he used his knowledge of the servant networks and trade relationships that connected the Ashanti capital to outlying territories. Through careful conversations with Ga slaves who worked in various parts of the palace, and by observing the tribal markings and speech patterns of traders who came to the capital, he was able to piece together a remarkably accurate picture of current conditions in his former kingdom. His report to King Osei Tutu revealed not only detailed intelligence about Ga political factions and military capabilities, but also demonstrated his continued deep understanding of his people's culture and values. More impressively, he identified several Ga nobles who had infiltrated the Ashanti trade networks as merchants and who could potentially serve as bridges between the two peoples. The king was forced to admit that Kwame's analysis showed insights that even his own spies had failed to provide, and the strategic implications of the information were immediately apparent. The second task proved even more challenging, as it required Kwame to propose a solution to a border dispute between the Ashanti and the Akwamu people that had been simmering for over a decade. Rather than suggesting the military solutions that most advisors favored, Kwame proposed a complex arrangement involving shared trading rights, intermarriage between noble families, and the establishment of joint councils to oversee disputed territories. His plan addressed not only the immediate issues of resource control, but the underlying cultural tensions that had made the conflict so intractable. Princess Akosua watched her father's growing respect for Kwame with a mixture of pride and apprehension. She could see that the king was genuinely impressed by her beloved's intelligence and diplomatic skills, but she also recognized that success in the first two trials only made the third task more crucial and more potentially devastating. The final test would force Kwame to choose between his own desires and what King Osei Tutu claimed was the greater good, and Princess Akosua feared that her father's definition of the greater good might not include room for their love to survive. On the seventh day, as the final festival celebrations reached their climax, King Osei Tutu summoned both Kwame and Princess Akosua to a private audience in his most sacred chamber, the room where the golden stool was kept, and where the most momentous decisions in Ashanti history had been made. The weight of tradition and ancestral power seemed to press down upon them as they entered the dimly lit space, where centuries of royal regalia gleamed in the flickering light of oil lamps. "Prince Kwame," the king began, his voice carrying the full authority of his office, "you have proven your intelligence, your connection to your people, and your strategic value as a potential ally. I am prepared to restore your freedom, to acknowledge your royal status, and to provide you with the resources necessary to reclaim your throne among the Ga people. In return, I ask only that you demonstrate the final quality, essential in a true leader, the ability to sacrifice personal desires for the greater good of your people." The terms of the final test were brutal in their simplicity. Kwame must choose between two paths. He could accept the king's offer to restore his throne and lead his people to prosperity as an allied ruler, but only if he agreed to renounce any claim to Princess Akosua and support her marriage to King Nana Osei. Alternatively, he could insist on his love for the princess, but in doing so would forfeit any chance of freedom or restoration, remaining a slave whose relationship with the royal daughter would eventually destroy both their peoples through war and political chaos. Princess Akosua felt her heart shatter as she listened to her father present this impossible choice. She understood the political logic behind it. Her marriage to King Nana Osei would secure the Denkira alliance, while Kwame's restoration would pacify the Ga territories, achieving her father's strategic goals while appearing to reward merit and loyalty. But the human cost of such a solution would be the destruction of the love that had become the most precious thing in both their lives. "Before you answer," King Osei Tutu continued, "I want you both to understand the full consequences of each choice. If Prince Kwame chooses love, he condemns not only himself, but Princess Akosua to a life of secrecy, shame, and eventual tragedy. If he chooses duty, he serves not only his own people but preserves my daughter's honor and the stability of multiple kingdoms. The question is not what you want, but what you are willing to sacrifice for those who depend upon your leadership." The silence that followed King Osei Tutu's ultimatum seemed to stretch for eternity, broken only by the soft sounds of the festival celebrations continuing outside the sacred chamber. Princess Akosua watched Kwame's face, seeing the internal battle being fought behind his eyes as he weighed his personal happiness against the welfare of thousands of people who looked to him for leadership. She wanted to speak, to tell him to choose his people and his freedom, but she knew that such words would only make his decision more agonizing. When Kwame finally spoke, his voice carried the quiet authority of a man who had found his answer not in his heart's desires, but in his deepest understanding of what it meant to lead. "Your Majesty," he said, "you ask me to choose between love and duty, but I believe you have presented a false choice. True love, the kind worthy of princes and princesses, does not demand the sacrifice of honor or the abandonment of responsibility. It transforms duty into joy and makes service to others an expression of the deepest affection." He turned to face Princess Akosua, and she saw in his eyes not the defeat she had feared, but a kind of radiant certainty that made her heart leap with hope. "My beloved princess, I choose both our love and our people's welfare, because I believe they can only be served together. I propose that we create something new, not a secret affair that shames us both, nor a political marriage that serves strategy, but not the heart, but a union that transforms the very nature of how kingdoms can relate to each other. His proposal was as audacious as it was brilliant. Rather than either accepting King Osei Tutu's terms or defying them, Kwame suggested a complete restructuring of the regional political landscape. Princess Akosua would marry him, uniting the Ashanti and Ga peoples through love rather than conquest. To compensate King Nana Osei for the broken engagement, the new Ashanti-Ga alliance would offer him trading privileges and military support that would make him more powerful than any political marriage could have achieved. Most importantly, their union would be presented not as a romantic indulgence, but as a revolutionary new model of diplomacy that other kingdoms could follow. "I stake my life, my throne, and my honor on this proposition," Kwame concluded, falling to one knee before King Osei Tutu, but keeping his eyes raised to meet the king's gaze. "Grant me 7 more days to prove that love guided by wisdom can accomplish what political calculation alone cannot achieve. If I fail, I will accept slavery gladly, and Princess Akosua will marry whomever you choose without complaint. But if I succeed, you will have created something unprecedented in African history, a kingdom built not on fear and conquest, but on the willing union of hearts that choose each other freely." King Osei Tutu looked at his daughter and saw in her face the same fierce determination that had built the Ashanti Empire, now focused not on conquest but on love. He looked at Prince Kwame and saw a leader whose vision extended beyond traditional boundaries to imagine new possibilities for how peoples could unite and prosper together. In that moment, the old king realized that perhaps the greatest legacy he could leave was not just a powerful kingdom, but a transformed understanding of what power could accomplish when guided by wisdom and love. 7 days later, Princess Akosua and Prince Kwame were married beneath the sacred baobab tree, where they had first declared their love, surrounded by representatives from dozens of kingdoms who had come to witness this revolutionary union. Their marriage became the foundation for the most prosperous and peaceful period in West African history, as other rulers followed their example and chose alliance over conquest, cooperation over domination. And in the years that followed, as their children grew to embody the best qualities of both Ashanti and Ga cultures, their love story was told and retold across the continent, not just as a tale of forbidden romance, but as proof that when love is guided by wisdom and tempered by genuine concern for others, it becomes a force powerful enough to reshape the world. If you enjoyed the story, then like, subscribe, and share this story with your loved ones. Also, tell us in the comments where you are watching from.